Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer here with my long-anticipated unscripted reaction/review/first thoughts on Kong Skull Island. Boy, this is one of the most anticipated films of the year for me, and it's only March. But anyway, spoiler-free, I promise. I will do my best to avoid spoilers, which is gonna be tricky. But anyway. On with the review. Now, actually, before we get to the review, just a quick reminder, and this might be new for you if you are new to this channel or didn't see my previous video, which I have linked to. The common trend that I've seen amongst people reviewing this movie is that they're doing a lot of comparisons to Godzilla. This Godzilla specifically, the legendary Godzilla, which Kong Skull Island is part of the same universe as. Now, in this previous video, which again I recommend you watch, I made it very clear I'm not going to do that. Because Kong Skull Island and Godzilla are different movies. Yes, they're both giant monster movies, but that's a very blanket term. When you get down to the specifics, Godzilla is a very serious disaster/horror movie, and Kong Skull Island is a more lighthearted, not necessarily like fun and silly, but more lighthearted action-adventure movie with a Vietnam War aesthetic. So, very different execution with those two different specific genres. Only way I would possibly consider comparing the two is if they turned out to actually be the same. Like, same tone, same specific genres at all. That would have been my only caveat. But I was right. Kong Skull Island is a very different movie from Godzilla, different in tone, different in every way, so no comparisons. I'm not going to say that Godzilla is better or worse, because they're different. Although to be fair, I will say this, I like them both. I mean, some people seem to have gotten the impression due to recent videos that I don't like Godzilla 2014 when I do, but we're not talking about Godzilla 2014. Kong Skull Island, that's what we're here to talk about. And Kong Skull Island is a darn good movie, a really satisfying movie. And it's weird because I don't necessarily want to call it a B movie, but it definitely feels like one. It feels like, how do I put it? Like, someone said, make the most A-grade B movie you can imagine. If that makes any sense. Like, make a B movie, but the best possible B movie you can make. And, I mean, I don't know if it is the best possible B movie that can be made, but Kong Skull Island definitely hits all the right marks. That much, I think, is nothing new in terms of what I'm bringing to the table. Everyone seems to like this movie. I like it too. I highly recommend it. So, let's see. It is very straightforward. It's not really complex. The characters are not quite archetypes, but they're very straightforward. Story is very straightforward as well. We go to an island, we get stuck there, we have to get off, there are giant monsters in the way. That's the plot, basically. Nothing too complicated to understand. But, as I said in my Godzilla 2000 review, and will no doubt continue to say for many years to come, simple is not bad. It can be executed badly, but simple is not in and of itself bad. Simple is easier to understand. We get it right away. And that's how Kong Skull Island works. We get this movie right away. And thus, we feel like there's nothing really left to, like, I was going somewhere with that. I don't remember, so forget it. Straightforward, good. But, you know, who cares about the people, right? Well, actually, no, that's not fair. The human characters are good. I was going to say that to transition into talking about the monsters, but I do want to make it clear. The human characters are good. As with any monster movie, one way or the other, the predominant amount of screen time is devoted to them, but it's good. It's entertaining. We're interested the whole time. And they do some interesting stuff in regards to how it ties into the Vietnam War, too. Like, I don't want to actually give it anything away, but it's kind of cliche what they do, a little bit, but, cliches exist for a reason. They exist because they work. It's not, including a cliche is not in and of itself bad, it's how well you do it. And Kong Skull Island, when it does its cliches, it does them well, especially in regards to the human cast. It's entertaining. I was paying attention the whole way through, and it worked. The movie is like over 2 hours long, just over 2 hours long, but it doesn't feel that way. It moved along at a quick pace. I was never checking my watch, partly because I wasn't wearing one, but also because I wouldn't have anyway. It was that good. It moved along and it didn't feel like 2 hours. Might feel like 2 hours if you're drinking a giant soda in the theater, but otherwise, it was good. That's the sign of a good movie, when it's long but it doesn't feel long. When you get to the end and you realize, oh wow, over already. But at the same time, you feel satisfied at the end. Speaking of satisfying, what I was originally going to do, talk about the monsters. Now, this is some darn satisfying monster action in this movie. Like, it's not, okay. In your typical King Kong movie especially, there's like two kinds of action, I guess. On the one hand, you have the original King Kong, the 1933 movie, which kept the action restrained by necessity, I guess is what you would say, because they were working with stop motion puppets that had to be moved one frame at a time. They couldn't necessarily go crazy with the action, so the characters had to stay on or close to the ground and couldn't be leaping through different sets everywhere because they had only so much time to get the movie done and so much they could do with the technology. It was great. It looked great. Even today it still looks great, but it wasn't necessarily boisterous. It was grounded, and perhaps that made it feel more realistic. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Peter Jackson's King Kong, which they had CGI, and therefore the sky was the limit with what they could do, so they went crazy with it, had them jumping around and falling into crevices and jumping up mountains, and T-Rexes fighting three T-Rexes fighting King Kong at once. Got it backwards a moment there. And Andero's getting tossed around like a rag doll, and you're wondering why she hasn't snapped her neck and spine 5 different times by this point at least. And yeah, it's thrilling and it's heart-pounding, but it's also maybe a little too crazy. Like, it gets to a point where it's almost like, okay, I'm having a hard time believing that Andero is still alive after all of this. At the very least, she should have whiplash, you know? Kong Skull Island's action is somewhere in the middle. Since they're using CGI, there's a lot they can do with it. Like they can have Kong leaping around and wrestling with bizarre inhuman monsters in ways that are incredible, but at the same time, they're not going so far that it's like a huge melee where everything is going everywhere at once and things like that. It's like if the fights from the Toho movies, King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes, if those had CGI, that's what I would compare it to. That's what Kong Skull Island feels like. And like I said, really satisfying. Kong actually fights quite a few creatures. There are some weird looking monsters on this Skull Island, including the skull crawlers, but neat ones too, and not all of them are deadly. That's the interesting thing. There are a couple that are just there. you know? And, let's see. Kong himself, it's a familiar Kong, and yet it's a new Kong. Like, Kong is oftentimes the tragic figure. That's the consistency throughout the different American films, certainly, and also to a certain extent the Japanese films, but not as much. But our predominant image of Kong is that he's the tragic figure. He's a king in his world, but then he's brought to our world a prisoner and a frightened animal. And ultimately he dies. So, spoiler alert for the entire King Kong franchise, but yeah, that's the general image of it. Kong usually is tragic. This Kong isn't tragic. I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say this Kong doesn't die, because you already know he's gonna show up fighting this Godzilla in a couple years. So obviously he's gonna live. But I won't say anything more though. But it's interesting because this is also the only Kong movie that stays on Skull Island, and therefore Kong is always king. Like, he doesn't become a tragic figure in this. He becomes the hero. He is more akin to Superman or Spider-Man or something. I mean, a superhero. Not quite. Like, it's not like he's, here I am, King Kong, ready to save the day. But he is in his element from start to finish. Unlike in the other movies where he's in his element from start to halfway through, and then suddenly he's out of his element and no longer in control, and ultimately unable to survive. That's another interesting thing. This is the most different of the King Kong movies. Like, even the two Japanese movies follow the formula of start on the island, bring him to civilization. Here is the first time that Kong has stayed on the island the whole time. And thus, that does change the dynamic drastically. We even get to see more of an idea of what his purpose is. But I don't want to go into spoilers, because some of that ties into the larger concept that we're going for with the Monsterverse, as we're calling it. Since I brought it up, though, I bet you are curious, how does it do tying in? Because we are doing a shared universe now, and a huge part of the reason why Kong Skull Island was brought from Universal back to Warner Brothers after Legendary had left Warner Brothers to go to Universal is because they are doing a shared universe. That was the reason. So they could work references to Monarch and such in there and build a shared universe that would eventually lead to the crossover. Now, that's a tricky notion, because even Marvel kind of stumbled, most people will tell you, during Phase 1 in that regard. I mean, look at how many negative reviews there are of Iron Man 2 saying too much build up to the Avengers. The potential problem is when you're making a movie and you're putting an emphasis on tying it into the greater universe, you might lose sight of the fact that you're trying to tell a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you could tell a story that feels like it ends, yeah, but there's clearly more that they were hinting at that hasn't happened yet, and now you're not satisfied. Not a problem in Skull Island, I promise you that. There's a lot of tie-in, because like the scientist characters work for Monarch. That's the organization from Godzilla. That's the obvious tie-in right there. But if you hadn't seen Godzilla, you wouldn't necessarily be confused. They introduce what Monarch is, or reintroduce it, as it were. And the hints at Godzilla, that's all I'm going to say. There are hints. I won't say what specifically, but they do hint at him. They are done in such a way that makes the fanboy in me grin, I will say, because like, hey, I know what they're doing when they say that, but they don't distract. That, I think, is the main problem people have with the, shared universe world building. It distracts from the story when it's done poorly. Here, it doesn't distract. It's there, it's noticeable, but it flows with everything else. Because the director treated this as its own movie. And that I think is good practice. Like, don't, just because you're doing a shared universe, and I love shared universes, I'm writing a shared universe myself, but just because you're doing that doesn't mean you should lose sight of the fact that you're telling a single story right here, right now. And that's good practice, and that's how Kong Skull Island is treated. Although, the last thing I will say on that note, stick around to the end of the credits. Just trust me on this. I won't say what happens. Maybe you've already had it spoiled for you, but I'm not going to spoil it. It'll have you excited. It's just a little glimpse of what's to come. Just you wait. But, and as a common courtesy to other people, don't put the spoiler down in the comments for this video just to be safe. Like, I may do a different spoiler video later on. Wait till then. Anyway, so yeah, Kong Skull Island is a good movie. Lots of fun, great giant monster movie, fun movie in general. Best King Kong movie ever made? I don't know. There have only been so many King Kong movies, but definitely one of the more enjoyable ones. Yeah, I'd say if you were to say, if you said the best were the original and the Peter Jackson version, which is certainly what I would say, Kong Skull Island deserves to stand alongside those ones. But, yeah, I highly recommend it. I had fun watching it. I really want to see it again. I really want to talk about the spoilers, but I'm bloodying my tongue. I'm angry at the car that just went by and hoping it didn't get picked up by my microphone. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's my cue to wrap it up. So, those are my thoughts. You see the movie yet? Do you want to see it? You know the drill. If you have any thoughts, leave them down below. Common courtesy, wait for the spoilers. Like, wait at least a week, okay, guys? Spoiling the movie in the comments section, that's just not a good move. That's a low thing to do. So, those are my thoughts. Loved it, looking forward to more. We just have to wait until 2019. I'll survive somehow. Till such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off.